Welcome to our step-by-step guide to facilitating your first workshop. This video is broken into chapters, and in those chapters, we'll cover important topics like starting with a clear purpose, as well as taking time to identify the critical outcomes so that you are clear on what you need to accomplish in the workshop. Then we'll look at things like crafting a good agenda and how you use your purpose to make sure the agenda is as good as possible. We'll also think about who should be attending your workshop, making sure your participants are well selected. And then we'll think about how to engage the right participant, how to get them participating in the ways you want. And then finally, we'll cover some tips on how to address challenges or concerns or fears that you might have, all in pursuit of making sure that you build the confidence you need to step into your first workshop and execute flawlessly.
The essential space for you to start when planning your workshop is actually with the end. Having a clear purpose and outcomes can allow you to then make the best decisions possible for the impact that you hope for. What you want to think about here is, how do I want people to be different by the end of this experience, and why am I gathering them in the first place? This is where you can think about things like, how do I hope people feel by the end of this? How do I hope people are able to engage with the new material or content? What do I hope people are able to do by the end of this workshop experience that they weren't able to do before? Those are the clear signals for what your purpose and outcome should be. And then you want to put those into plain language that you can communicate to the people who are going to be in that workshop. That's a powerful spot to launch when you're even first inviting folks with that why and that clear purpose, and all the other decisions that you make for your workshop design stem from that purpose and outcome focus.
Think about the ideal participants. And sometimes that might be out of your control because you've been hired to come and facilitate something. But oftentimes it's in your control if you're facilitating a meeting, or you can have some influence over it. And so just want to encourage you to think about who is ideally going to have an impact in the session, who maybe shouldn't be there. Have an intentional conversation about having the right people in the room. And it's so important to think about naming your workshop in alignment with that purpose, especially if you're doing really small workshops that are basically meetings, but we're trying to imbibe a bit more energy and a bit more participation in our everyday meetings. Don't just throw a meeting on the calendar and call it a meeting or whatever comes to mind. Think carefully about the purpose and how you can name that meeting and that workshop in a way that helps convey the purpose. Because clarifying the purpose is not just about identifying it and making it clear to yourself, it's about how you make it clear to your participants so they understand coming in what we're going to do and a little bit about how we might approach it.
After you have identified your clear purpose and outcomes, then you can start digging into the actual organization of your agenda. And one thing that we oftentimes will work with folks on is identifying some clear assessment points that can be check-ins along the way from the beginning to the end of your workshop that tell you and tell the folks who are in your workshop whether or not you're moving in the right directions. These are evidence or check-in points that tell you, are we moving the ways that we hoped onto those outcomes? Get those assessment points in place, and then from there you can start thinking about those key activities that you'd like to do in service of meeting those assessment points and then ultimately getting to the outcomes you hope for. One additional thing that's really key for you to also think about is pace and breaks. Too often folks, when they're designing, they're so focused on their activities that they forget about the necessary breaks that folks need in order to wind down a little bit, in order to integrate new material and new information, and that's so key. We recommend for folks to put breaks in every 60 to 90 minutes depending upon the activities that you're doing.
Another thing to consider is that agendas aren't lists of topics. So oftentimes when people put an agenda together, it's just, here are these things we want to discuss. A well-crafted agenda is one that gets into how we're going to get people participating, how we're going to drive to the many outcomes that we want to accomplish throughout the arc of the journey we're going on. And that point around it being a journey is one that's really important, because you don't want to just put these string of topics together. You want to think about what's the journey you're taking folks on. And the assessment points that Eric just mentioned can be really helpful there, because if we're thinking about where we want folks to go, how are we testing to ourselves that we were able to take them where we wanted to go and we're on the right path. It's really transformative because it helps you shift from this mindset of I'm here to run this activity or have this conversation versus I'm here to get them from point A to point B to point C and then eventually to this outcome that I started with a desire to get to.
So after you have your clear assessment points and have roughed out the arc of your workshop, then you're going to start narrowing into what are the best activities to get to those outcomes and the purpose that you've identified. We oftentimes like to think about activities and activity types through the lenses of divergent work, emergent work, and convergent work. So divergent work is when we're opening things up, new ideas, new possibilities, getting all those stickies on the board, for example. Emergent work is where we start to make some meaning out of what's out there, maybe start to weigh different options. Conflict can come up in that space. And then also that convergent work where we ultimately narrow in, prioritize, and make some choices. So when you're thinking about your workshop, your purpose and outcomes, you want to ask yourself, is this mainly divergent work? Is it mainly convergent work? Are we prioritizing, making choices? Or is it a mix? And at what points do those happen? That can then point you to which activities are going to be best suited to meet those outcomes and ultimately make sure that you're choosing things strategically in order to move people to those points.
It's also important to consider how you're helping people step into the space. A lot of people were talking about warm-ups or energizers, but ultimately the critical piece is thinking about how you boot people up into whatever it is you're working on. Often we need to help them shift gears from some other topic they've been thinking about. We might have to socialize some new ideas. So making sure you take time to do that and orient people to the problem space or the concept or a topic you're leaning into, and also thinking about how you're going to land the plane. When you think about that last technique, that last activity you're going to use to get to that final outcome, do you need to make a decision? If so, you should be thinking about decision-making techniques and tools. Are you going to assign some additional focus areas? If so, then maybe there's some commitment type of activities. Regardless, just thinking about where you want to end and aligning with that, thinking about how you want to end, aligning with that, really great starting points. Last final thing I'll say is oftentimes people jam their agendas with lots of techniques and activities, and you'll typically find that the practice you need to get good at is deciding what to remove, not what you need to add.
When focusing in on your activities, you really want to think about optimal engagement for your participants based on the purposes you're hoping for. So cool activities we like, engaging activities we like. When opening things up, we really enjoy doing things like impromptu networking, great way to get folks immediately connected both to each other and to the topic at hand. Different sentiment check activities like Pick Your Nick or the Nicolas Cage Gauge from Mural is really fun, just to get people to think about how they're feeling based on the different moods of Nicolas Cage. And then activities that really mix up ways that folks are moving from solo to small group to whole group work. Something like 1, 2, 4 all from Liberating Structures, where you have people initially think individually or solo reflection on a topic, then they pair up with somebody, then that pair joins another pair to create a 4, and then you get into the whole group and you're building meaning and you're building connection across each of those conversation turns. This is a place where mixed practice is really key. We always emphasize how important it is to make sure that you're providing multiple ways for folks to engage with material and topics, and mixing that up across a day, because you'll find that some folks will gravitate towards some of the solo or small group work more. Some folks will engage more in the whole group work, or folks will engage more in the written versus the visual. You want to provide multiple modes and ways for folks to enter in.
If you're looking for inspiration for more activities than the few that Eric just mentioned, recommend heading over to Voltage Control's website and checking out our methods and activities posts. Lots of stuff there. And we also have lots of downloads for various different templates in Miro or Mural. If you join our online community, there's even more resources available at your fingertips and lots of discussions amongst community members around how they're planning their agendas and different activities they're using. I also highly encourage you to think about ways that you can create your own activities. You can draw inspiration from existing ones and also combine that with your your purpose. What is this outcome you're trying to drive to, and how can you make that relate as closely as possible to what participants are thinking about and doing? So definitely get creative about what you ask participants to do, and you might find that they find it more authentic and they lean in and engage more.
So after you've got your activities all planned out, you've got your agenda, you've got to focus on the experience you want to create based on the purpose and outcomes, then it's also essential for you to think about all the logistics day of, how the space is set up, meeting maybe your hosts or your clients, and really making sure that the experience that you want for folks can be a reality. All this starts long before the workshop happens, so you really want to make sure you're having conversations with your client or the host of that workshop to make sure that you're clear on what the space is going to be. You have pictures and visuals of what that looks like. You have a sense of how many chairs and what the tables are going to be possibly set up as, and really making sure that you're clear on, hey, if we're going to have group work, if we're going to have people in teams, that the space really is set up for that. So if you're wanting people in teams, making sure that you have round tables with chairs that can be around those so people can be working with each other. You have a clear sense of the supplies that you need. So if you're wanting to get people working visually, do you have those big sticky notes? Do you have the little sticky notes? What are you going to use to write on those? All those kinds of things that you want to really make sure you have out ahead of time and planned. And ideally, you're able to do a walkthrough long before the workshop starts. So we at a minimum are oftentimes getting to our space a minimum of an hour before to test things out, make sure technology is working, everything's in place so there are no surprises. And then even before that happens, we have eyes on what's in the space.
In addition, you might want to think about putting together a run of show, which is a document that details all the touch points, down to the minute of all the things you're going to do. So the fact that you are going to arrive there an hour or more early. You want to include your host contact info. Who is your point of contact there? It may not be the person you secured the space from. It may be someone else. There might be security requirements at the front door that you need to be aware of. So just understanding all those things and how you're going to get entrance into the facility and what you're going to do minute by minute. What is your exit plan? If you need to be out of the space by a certain time, how are you going to make sure you get out efficiently? Is there going to be a warm lunch provided, and who's taking care of getting that, and how's it going to arrive and at what time? All those logistics, and have them planned out in your run of shows so that once you're there to execute, you don't have to think about those things. You can consult your list and just check them off as you go. And then you can use that run of show as a dry run. You can kind of, in your mind, walk through these steps. If you can get there a day early, oftentimes when we're doing a workshop out of town, the first time we actually step into the venue is the day before the event. We can walk around and kind of familiarize ourselves with the space.
So you put all this time into planning, you've got your agenda set, you've been in the space, you've got everything put in the right place there, and you're ready to go. But things won't always go as planned. In fact, I would plan on things not going as planned, and oftentimes challenges or new things will emerge as you're facilitating your workshop. In fact, that's one of the key reasons why adaptive is one of the key qualities for our work with facilitators. So you got to be ready to move in the moment as things don't go as planned and challenges come up. Oftentimes key challenges we see in a space, certainly we can have more domineering or dominating voices, people wanting to take up space and share when other folks don't. We also have challenges that come up around sticking to time. Also some challenges that can come up around just conflicts and how to address conflict. A couple of ways that you can address those three common challenges. Dominating voices, really key for you to, out of the gate, set some key pop-up rules or boundary conditions for the workshop that outline how important equal airtime is, so that the whole group is aware of making sure that we're hearing from each voice. So at the point that that comes up, you can point people back to those agreements from the beginning of the workshop itself. And oftentimes that's enough to nudge people back into that space. Timing is always a challenge. We're always running ahead or behind of our agenda. And that's something to make sure you really have a keen eye to the agenda and your time blocks. and a keen eye to your purpose. So in making adjustments, those should always be in connection to your purpose. So that if you want to cut something out or move something to be longer, ask yourself, is this going to help us better get to our purpose in making this adjustment? And finally, conflict, that's always going to come up. In fact, that can be a good sign that you've got multiple ideas and perspectives in the room. First thing you want to make sure and do is have pop-ups that address respect and navigating conflict and taking a growth-oriented mindset so that when it comes up, you can remind folks there. Also, too, that's a place where you want to think, okay, as I'm responding to this conflict, is this in service of the purpose that we're hoping for? And if not, then I might need to redirect this conversation here if it's undermining the purpose for our topic or the relationships that we hope for.
If you reflect on what Eric just shared, at no point did he label individuals as having a specific trait or that this is how you counter these certain personalities. And that's an important thing to reframe if that's a way you're thinking about your participants, because we don't want to antagonize our participants. We don't want to turn them into villains. And ultimately, these behaviors happen because of a mismatch in expectations or lack of alignment on purpose. And so coming back to purpose where we started, if we get really clear on that, we communicate it, we help them understand why we're asking them to do things, you're gonna notice a big shift in how people behave and how they show up and how they participate. And even having conversation with them about the purpose and about the behaviors and what you're noticing, having that be a group conversation can be really powerful. That's another great shift in dealing with conflict, is realizing that you don't have to be the person solving the problem. You just have to be the person creating the container and the conditions where those problems can be solved. So even reflecting to the group what you're noticing and what do they think we should do? How do we get past this? It seems like this is happening right now. What do you think we should do? These are great prompts to redirect to the group and embrace these emerging things and behaviors that might be a little frightening at first, but that's the key thing, is realizing you're just there to identify it, call attention to it, and help the group move through it.
So to recap, to have your excellent workshop, you start with your purpose. You're really clear on your purpose and outcomes. You then move into thinking about your activities and agenda, making sure that you're really digging into engagement and making sure that you've put together the right activities and engagement based on your assessment points and your purpose. And then being clear on the key logistics for that workshop day. What's the space need to look like? What you're gonna do in arriving and leaving that space? What are the essentials for how it's set up? And then ultimately what to do when things don't go as planned, because they won't go as planned. And your ability to navigate those challenges and be adaptive is key to have that essential, impactful workshop.
You add all that together with everything we talked about today, and you're going to be in a really good spot to have an amazing first workshop. And so we wish you the best of luck. And if you have additional questions, join our community. It's a great place to come and meet other facilitators and get all your questions answered.